Hello. So today I am going to be presenting my presentation for this week's assignment on the history of marginalization. So the title of my presentation is called Invisible Yet Impacted: Understanding the Marginalization of Undocumented Immigrants by me. So, understanding undocumented immigrants in the United States. What is an undocumented immigrant? An undocumented immigrant is an individual that comes to the United States from another country illegally without any citizenship paperwork approved and signed by the government. Undocumented immigrants can be individuals from countries like Mexico, Colombia, Israel, or Cuba. There are approximately 14 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, according to Pew Research Center, based on 2023 data. So some myths and realities of undocumented immigrants. Some myths are immigrants are criminals and they increase crime. And in reality, numerous studies show that immigrants have lower crime rates than native-born citizens. Being undocumented is a civil offense, not a criminal one. Another myth is they don't work and use welfare, when in reality, they are the hardest working individuals, and majority of them that are employed, they don't qualify for Medicaid, food stamps, Section 8 housing, and Medicaid. So I decided to watch the documentary called Living Undocumented that was produced by Selena Gomez back in 2019. Um, the focus of this documentary, it followed, I believe, 8 individuals on a 6 episode series on Netflix that follows 8 individuals, like I just mentioned, that are immigrants from other countries that struggle with receiving documentation in the United States. This documentary explores the daily struggles for immigrants that are at risk of being deported due to not having documentation in the United States. The documentary followed, so I chose 2 of them that really still, sorry, I can't talk right now. Stood out to me were Alejandra and Luis. Alejandra, she was an immigrant from Mexico and she came to the United States when she was younger to have a better life and get away from the crime and violence in Mexico. Due to the Trump administration in 2018, she was deported back to Mexico and her family had to be separated. It also followed Luis. Luis was also an immigrant from Honduras, and he came to the U.S. for a better life. And he was also an undocumented immigrant who was at risk of being deported. And Luis's pregnant girlfriend was deported by ICE, and this separated their family as well. So, some major themes that I noticed in this documentary were family separation. All of the individuals in the documentary, they were separated by their from their families. Alejandra was deported back to Mexico, and she took her youngest daughter with her while her husband and oldest daughter stayed in the United States. Um, Also, another thing to mention was she was a military wife. Her husband was a veteran, and they still chose to send her back. Luis was separated from his pregnant girlfriend due to her being deported back to her country with Luis's child and stepchild. And I think at the time she was like 8 months pregnant. Um, Fear. Another major theme was fear. Because a lot of them, they had a fear of being, well, majority of them had a fear of being deported back to a country known for immense violence and crime as well, as being separated from their families. Some of these immigrants, they came over to the United States at a really young age, so the United States is all that they know and the only environment that they know. So it's also a lot of fear around going back to a place that they don't know at all. Impact of immigration policies. In 2018, the Trump administration moved to a zero tolerance policy, which impacted undocumented individuals and their families. The zero tolerance policy prosecutes illegal immigrants with no exception for asylum seekers or those with minor children. There was a lot of mental health effects on adults and children, and you can visibly see that in the documentary. Deportation of family members that are undocumented immigrants is devastating and detrimental to their loved ones' mental health. They can experience mental health issues such as PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Being separated from your mother or father can be traumatizing, especially for younger children, because it is scary to be away from your normalized environment. So, some major events that I highlighted from the documentary, once again, children experiencing anxiety and trauma around their parent being deported back to their country. Um, for example, like I mentioned earlier, Alejandra, her youngest daughter had to go with her back to Mexico um, because she had to raise her. She couldn't be without her mom. And then the oldest daughter stayed back with her dad. So it's just the whole family was separated and she had a fear of her marriage not even working out um because of the distance. So some legal barriers and citizenship process was also a huge event that I highlighted in here that I saw in the documentary, such as like the wait time to obtain citizenship could be a 20-year wait. There was a lot of denials to stop deportations, the zero tolerance policy, and just seeing that ICE treats illegal immigrants like criminals and they're just here for a better life. Timeline of marginalization of undocumented immigrants. So I started off in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act. This was the first law in the United States to ban a specific ethnic group from entering the country for 10 years and denying any current Chinese residents to become U.S. citizens. 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is a law that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson that replaced the quota immigration system with the preference system based on labor skills needed in the United States, which opened doors for Asians and Latin American immigrants to come into the country. 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, which was a law that was signed by President Reagan that ensured that illegal immigrants were not hired by employers and I-9 forms had to be filled out by new hires to ensure citizenship. It also granted legal status to millions of undocumented immigrants that had been living in the United States long-term and agricultural workers. There was also increased border enforcement under this act as well. 1996, Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. This act strengthened U.S. immigration laws by increasing border patrol, imposed harsher penalties for smuggling and documentation fraud, and mandatory bars of 3 to 10 years from re-entering the United States for overstaying in the country. So 2001, post 9/11, was probably the turn point for um, undocumented immigrants, specifically Arabs and Muslims. Um, but pretty much if you were an illegal immigrant at that time or after 9/11, they were cracking down on, sending them back to their country. Um, just because of the terrorist attacks. For example, they created the Department of Homeland Security, they increased Border Patrol. ICE programs were created because of this. They had stricter visa screenings and a primary focus on deporting illegal aliens, and then also the creation of security at airports. Um, and it does state, Fawzi et al. Stated that roughly 20 policies were introduced in the first 12 months, and among these, 15 were targeted Muslims living in the United States. 2012 DACA policy introduced. In June 2012, the Obama administration introduced an executive order that granted temporary protection from deportation and work authorization to young documented immigrants that came to the United States as children. 2017 increased ICE enforcement policies. In 2017, President Trump began increasing ICE enforcement policies to ensure all illegal immigrants that were in the United States will be deported. This included all aliens removable, such as families, longtime U.S. residents, and dreamers. And then another one in 2017, presumption of release policy reversed. President Trump reversed a prior policy to release pregnant immigrants. And in December 2017, Trump ended that policy, and ICE was allowed to detain pregnant women and deport them from the US, hence, Luis's pregnant girlfriend. 2018, zero tolerance policy introduced. In December 2017, President Trump introduced the zero tolerance policy that separated thousands of migrant children from their parents at the US-Mexican border. In 2025, TPS terminations, the Trump administration ended the TPS program and returned to a faithful application of the law, stating that TPS is now truly temporary, and USCIS terminated categorical parole programs like the Cuban, Haitian, and Nicaraguan um, and Venezuelan parole program. This is just some scholarly research on immigration marginalization. Um, and I wanted to make a specific slide about that research. So post 9/11 is kind of what stood out to me the most and like the turning point for illegal immigrants, because it changed global security like crazy. And just because of the specific attacks on to prevent attacks on the United States. Um, However, Arab and Muslims were the populations that were primarily affected, but all illegal immigrants were the target for deportation. Since 9/11, 55% of Hispanics felt less secure, and 80% state that they were worried about the future than before 9/11. Post 9/11, there was a lot of financial hardship on families that were, undocumented immigrants, emotional distress, increased risk of fatal disease, increased social risks to vulnerable children. From 2017 to 2018, Donald Trump became president, and stricter policies on immigration were created, which created an immense uproar for undocumented immigrants at the time. He was in the process of building the wall on the US and Mexican border. 2025, Donald Trump became president for a second time, and immigration policies are stricter right now than ever before. President Trump does not want any illegals in the United States without proper documentation. It doesn't matter who you are. Um, Difficulties to obtain healthcare, jobs, and Social Security, barriers to access and opportunities. He's making it super, super hard for illegal immigrants to obtain any type of government assistance. So personal reflection and bias and awareness. So some personal assumptions that I had before the documentary. I thought it was easier to receive citizenship. Um, and that's something that I learned very quickly watching the documentary. Um, I didn't really understand the emotional effects it can have on a family and a person. So how did those stories challenge my stereotypes? They challenged I mean, I really don't have any stereotypes against undocumented individuals. I come from a Hispanic, Mexican family. So I never really had stereotypes, towards my people, but I just something that, popped up to me was that I just felt like I had a lot more compassion for illegal immigrants that are undocumented, because they were deported from their families. They made them separate their families. So it motivated me to want to help others in similar positions and just to advocate for better policies as a future social worker. And to witness and understand undocumented immigrants' daily struggles is disheartening and scary. And we never realize one's lived experience and the things that they go through every day. Um, Reflection on empathy and cultural humility. This documentary has helped me to always self-reflect on my own biases and always be empathetic towards others' situations because we do not understand one's lived experience. Impact on social work practice. So barriers undocumented clients face when accessing services. There's a lot of barriers, especially in our world today. I have experience working with a lot of undocumented individuals, and just trying to provide letters that their children are receiving services in the United States to kind of stop these deportations. Fear of engaging with systems due to deportation risk. There's a lot of fear. They don't want to ask for help because they're scared that they're going to be sent back. Um, Ethical responsibility of social workers, we do have a code of ethics that we have to follow. However, we also have to protect the rights of um, the the rights and privacy of those that are undocumented as well. So we have to balance both. Importance of advocacy and confidentiality. Advocate, advocate, advocate for policies to be better in the future and for current policies to be changed or eliminated so that we have easier systems to help immigrants to become citizens. Consequences of ignoring marginalization, continued trauma, mistrust, and inequity, harm to children and families, perpetuation of systemic oppression, missed opportunities for meaningful intervention. Moving toward a culturally grounded approach. There's a strong need right now in social work practice for trauma-informed, culturally responsive practice. I feel like actually in every type of, even in healthcare, social work, there needs to be a lot more trainings on trauma and being trauma-informed for individuals like undocumented immigrants. Advocacy for immigrants' rights and policy reform, like I've mentioned, self-reflection to address personal and professional biases, and advocate, advocate, advocate. And that's it. Thank you.